webinar on the preparation of concept notes for the call for proposal support to civil society organization and local authorities in the Republic of Moldova. The block 3 will be composed today of a session. You see there is a mistake on the slide. It will take place between 11 and 12:30 Chisinau time. And we will work in the same way as we did yesterday. Somebody is saying that the interpreter can't hear us. Can others hear me speaking? Can somebody confirm so that I'm sure that everybody can hear me, so it's not me, okay? So I guess it's not me. Okay, let's wait for a sign that interpreters can hear us, since you probably know that there is a special room where you can also follow this webinar in Romanian language. Okay, I guess they are trying to fix the problem. Okay. Let's just wait for another second. Okay, so we have a confirmation that they can hear us. Okay, so welcome again, also for those for listening in Romanian, to block 3 of the webinar devoted to preparation of concept notes for the call for proposal support to civil society organizations and local authorities of Moldova. For those of you, if there is anybody who wasn't with us today, they should know that a corrigendum has been published by the EUD and Commission Services on Friday, in which you are informed that the deadline for this submission of concept notes has been extended for 2 weeks. So the new deadline is 18th of May. So this gives you a bit more time to prepare the concept notes, the topic that we are discussing today. Okay, today's webinar will be also in duration of 1 hour and a half. I apologize, there is a mistake on the slide. So we will work in the same way as yesterday. We will have 1 hour presentation, and then hopefully half an hour Q&A session. And also we have time. I would like to discuss with you the homework that you were given yesterday and see where you are at preparation with your concept notes. So yesterday in the first block, we discussed the guidelines for applications. So basically what are the requirements and the limitation under which you can apply under this call. Then in block 2 in the afternoon, yesterday, we looked at the template of the concept note and evaluation criteria. And I was trying also to give some examples and tip and how to approach the filling in on the concept note, and also what you should be focusing in preparing and filling in the template, since this is it offers quite limited space. So today we will be discussing, or I will present to you, a couple of useful tools in preparing and designing projects in general, and we will be focusing especially on a couple of tools that you can use, especially in a situation when you're preparing the concept note. So we will be focusing today on tools that can help you in effectively prepare the concept notes. And I will basically walk you through main elements and main tools, analytical tools that you can use. This can be the person that's writing the project, but the best way to use this tool is actually in a participatory manner, and that is that together the organizations, the institutions, potentially also stakeholders, and even target groups gets together and discusses the preparation of the project, their project idea, and while doing so, uses or can make use of some of these tools to make the preparation effective. And these tools can be very useful for maybe for you to check whether you have covered all of the aspects analytically and all of the information that are needed to complete the concept notes. Okay, so what am I actually talking about? Basically, I'm talking about the main tools that have been developed within the context of the logical framework approach to developing projects and project design. As I've mentioned yesterday in Block 2, this is the most known, widespread, mostly used approach in developing projects, and it also important, and that's the reason why I'm talking about it today and presenting it to you, is that this is the basis on which European Commission plans its own interventions, and it's also the underpinning logic based on which the EU templates for EU projects, EU grants have been developed, and this is also, very useful for you to approach in preparing this project proposal, or the case that we have today, which is the preparation of concept notes. So, in a very short notes, we can say that the logical framework approach is important because it allows you to have participation, or it's a participatory method for developing a plan for your project. It is a very good way of presenting the results of your planning exercise, because if you take all of the steps, we won't be looking at all of the steps because you don't need to undertake all of the steps to prepare the concept notes. But if you do it, at the end, you get a very nice table, so-called logical framework or log frame, in which you have basically, in short, presented all of the important elements of your project. And this approach is also useful because when you develop this matrix or table, basically this can then be used for later on in implementation phase for monitoring and evaluation of your project. So basically the logical framework is a way of describing a project in a logical way. So this is well described, it is described objectively, it can be easily evaluated, and it is clearly structured. It's a very good short visualization of your project. We have a couple of questions already at the beginning about the presentations from yesterday. Eugenia is asking whether this will be available, and Leila as well. I think I mentioned, but I should mention it probably again, that all of these webinars from yesterday, all of the blocks from yesterday and today's blocks, the recording of this will be available on the platform of the project. And I also mentioned that there will be, as of today, till the deadline, the 18th of May, an available online help desk for you to help you potentially in any dilemmas you would have in formulating the concept note. So all of the materials, all of the recordings will be available. Also, there will be a help desk for you on which you can rely, or it can support you in answering basic questions and dilemmas that you would have in preparation of your concept notes. Okay, let's proceed. Those of you who maybe know the logical framework approach would probably now be asking me, okay, but why do we need, why are you explaining us the log frame approach if we are only developing the concept notes? We don't need the log frame to apply for the concept notes. And that is true, the answer is yes, you do not need it. You don't need it in terms of this being a annex document that you need to attach to the application. You will only need to do that as a mandatory requirement once you get hopefully to the full application stage. So logical framework is a requirement, a must, when you submit a full application for a new project. However, as you will see through the steps that I will now be taking you, or the three main tools that I will be presenting you, the first two phases, which are about analyzing your context, your stakeholders, target group, and your problems and your objective, are basically focused on the key information about your project, future project, your project idea that you need to fill in the concept note. So basically undertaking the basic steps, the first step in the logical framework approach helps you in a very consistent, clear, and let's say methodological manner to fill in the main parts of the concept notes. And I will clearly state for which phase and which tool can relate to which part on the concept notes. So again, What I'm explaining to you now is not a mandatory. The EU Commission does not require you to undertake these steps. What we are talking is about very effective and easy to use tools. So you do not need a specialist, you don't need an expert, you don't need a trainer to do that. You just need to understand. You will see it's very basic, and you can use that to really help you and guide you how to fill in the concept notes. So as you can see on the slide in one sentence, the logical framework approach is extremely useful, even if you're only preparing the concept notes, because it basically helps you undertake the basic analysis that underpins the development of the log frame or the main elements of the concept note. And that is, analyzing the stakeholders, explaining the problem, explaining, why you decided to intervene on the specific area, on the specific issue, the way you did. So these are really the key issues you need to elaborate in the concept note. And here you see it. Basically, these are the 8 main steps in the log frame. At the end of, you get a log frame. We will now not be going through all the steps, but basically we will focus on what you see, the 4 points and the 4 steps, the first 4 steps that you see in bold letters. And that is, we will look at what is a stakeholder analysis, how you analyze your problem, how you transform it into a set of objectives, and then how you decide on scoping of the project, or basically what you will be zooming in and what you will be focusing, what will be your project objective. And this is actually what your concept notes template expects you to communicate in it. Okay, so step 1 is stakeholder analysis. And before maybe embarking on that, if you still have, remember yesterday I asked you to have in front of you the template of the concept note, the offline version, which is available on the website of the European Commission when the call for proposal for this call has been published. I'm going to share the link now in the public chat again, just in case you do not have it on you, so you can open it again. This is Annex A1. It's the 4th document from reading listed from above. And if you look to the main elements, the stakeholder analysis is an extremely useful tool in elaborating point 1, 2, 3 in the concept notes, which demands you to describe and define the target group, the final beneficiaries, their needs and their constraints. Maybe doing the stakeholder analysis is a bit wider because you don't analyze just strictly the target group, final beneficiaries, but also stakeholders. But nevertheless, this is the main kind of tool that you can use. You can decide only to focus on, target group and who are your potential beneficiaries, and maybe put stakeholders aside. But you can also opt for actually looking at the whole picture in the project, who are all entities, people, if you would like, persons that have to do something with the project intervention you are planning. So, why would you do it? Because except for what I explained, is that your stakeholder interest in relation to the subject that you want to focus your project on. Maybe there might not be positively oriented, they might not be supported, or they might not care, but they might have a lot of influence on your project activities or your project outcomes. So it's very important to consider this from the beginning. Also, there might be potential conflicts in terms of understanding how your organization thinks a problem should be solved, but the other stakeholders think it should be solved in a different manner. Also, it helps you assess implementation risk. If important stakeholder like public authority has a totally opposite view and intentions, then this can be a big risk for implementing your project or even considering the type of intervention. So this is extremely important to consider. Also, that it helps you identify possibilities and opportunities for cooperation. By going through this, using this tool, you might identify a new stakeholder that you haven't thought before, so it might open new avenues for cooperation. Also, it's important stakeholder analysis. The tool helps you decide what is the level of their participation, to what extent they need to be involved, or to the extent you want to involve them. And also, again, it helps you decide the planning process in terms of the participation, in terms of the approach of the stakeholders and target group involvement. Before you embark on the stakeholders analysis, you should think about, okay, who are they, first maybe in theoretical sense, but then very concretely name them, list them. So here are two useful definitions that you can use, or different definitions that I use for what you should consider when you consider stakeholders for your intervention. So under definition 1, you see these are persons, groups, or institutions, very importantly, who have interest in a planning or a change process that you are going to undertake. So they have some kind of interest. Definition 2 is very similar, but still it's all actors whose interest will be negatively or positively affected by a possible intervention. So you see some of the keywords in terms of stakeholder is to consider their interest, but also the effect your project intervention will have in both negative and positive sense on their situation or on them as such. So if we now go back to the call for proposal, or let's say the general rules, the guidelines for applicants, very typically, not just for this call, but generally, the type of stakeholders that you consider in this broader sense are, first of all, partners. Of course, it's the lead applicant, it's you, co-applicants, affiliate entities, associate, etc. But you usually, and this is defined in the guidelines for applicants in section 2.1. But what is utterly important, especially in the context of using this tool for filling in the concept note section 1, 2, 3, is that you consider who is your target group, who are the groups and entities who will be directly and hopefully positively affected by the project at the project outcome level. And also here it is important for you to concretely consider, okay, what is my target group, but what will the direct beneficiaries of this project be? You remember we had a discussion, I think, at 2 points yesterday, discussing what is the difference between target group and direct beneficiaries. So I think this is clear for now. Very shortly, what are the steps in stakeholder analysis? Basically, you identify them. Okay, you have a small brainstorming with your colleagues, with your potential, project partners. Okay, who are they? And you just basically list them. You say, the local authority of that district, or that ministry, or that agency, or that local community, or that media, or that organization, or that institute. You basically just name them very concretely. The second step you need to undertake, and I will show you in the next slide, a very useful scheme that you can use, is that you assess how important they are in relation to your project idea. Are they very important? Is their importance high or low? And usually, again, through brainstorming with your potential project team, this can be done very easily. And it's very useful if you brainstorm, because then it means that you develop a common understanding of stakeholders, and also you're developing together the project idea. And this is basically in the direction of making it consensual. So there are no differences in understanding on how you're going to intervene, who you're going to target. The third step, also very important, is to assess how influential the stakeholders are in relation to your project idea. Basically, you need to consider how much influence they are. And this in let's say, in a call for proposals that in the context of which we are having discussion today, usually this will be public authorities, whether local authorities or national authorities. So probably they can have a lot of influence. So these are very important stakeholders. And this is very important to really consider from the beginning in terms of their attitudes towards your project, because this can really change in the direction, the way you're going to develop your projects and then later on implement it. It can change even your course. You might been considering a certain course on how you're going to approach solving a problem with your project. but you realize that the most important and influential stakeholder is not going to be inclined to support you or be at all interested, but you need their interest and their support. So if you don't have it, you might take a different way, or for example, you might not approach the solution to the problem directly, but maybe indirectly. I can illustrate that. For example, you are considering within the context of this call for proposals to design a project which would focus on monitoring public procurement in a concrete municipality or a district. And you want to do it both because the call asks you to focus on capacity building. You want to do it both with developing capacities of local organizations, maybe media organizations, nonprofit, to do that and build their capacities and then basically do the monitoring. But when you do stakeholder analysis in the beginning, so this is your, let's say, rough idea, brainstorming idea, but then you realize in your stakeholder analysis by conducting this assessment of importance and influence that the local authority is very closed, they are not inclined to be open to share the data, so you might have, or your, let's say, organizations that you're going to build capacities to monitor the public procurement in that specific local authority, they, for some reason, they don't have skills, or they are not sure, they don't have experience with working with civil society, so they might be close. You won't get data, you won't get cooperation, okay? And through the stakeholder analysis, you can actually assess this. You can consider this because you might have a really good idea. It's a very good idea. It's relevant for the call. But through the stakeholder analysis, we now establish that this stakeholder is important, but its influence is great, but its influence is negative. So they do not have interest or they're closed. So what you do, you might think about different ways of doing that. Okay, you say, okay, then what we maybe need to do is to have a project that's focused on, building capacities of civil organizations to do monitoring of problem procurement, but maybe develop also a training model for local authorities to raise awareness with them how this is important for them and to cooperate. So you maybe need to then develop different types of activities, or maybe even you change the whole objective of the project. You might assess that maybe it's better to work with local citizenry and develop raising awareness and pressure mechanisms so that the citizens develop the skills and the knowledge and raise awareness, and they and through that you basically influence the local authority to become more open and engaged in sharing the public procurement information, for example. So basically what I try to do for you is to illustrate on a very simple project idea of how the stakeholder analysis of assessing how a stakeholder is important or not important, influential or not influential, can drastically change how you're going to intervene potentially into the problem or the challenge that you're trying to address through your project. And this tool can really help you in that. The fourth step you undertake in the stakeholder analysis, that you place each stakeholder on the importance influence scale. And in the next two slides, I will show you a very easy diagram, which you basically, you can use, you can download after we finish this, and you can just use, and for each stakeholder you can assess, okay, where they are, high importance, low importance, high influence, low influence, and then we can see what you do with such a stakeholder. And the fifth step is, of course, that you decide how you will include the stakeholder in the planning and implementation process. Probably you remember that one of the issues in the concept note that you are requested to fill in when describing your target group, your final beneficiaries, how they are going to be affected by a project, is that you need to explain any participatory process or participation by target group and final beneficiaries in your developing of your concept note. So again, this directly relates to what the concept note requests you, and the stakeholder analysis can also help you. There are three basically levels in how you can include and plan your stakeholders to be involved in your project. but also at the stage of developing the concept notes. So how do we define importance? Here on the slide, you see the basic definition of importance, which means that importance indicates the extent to which stakeholders' needs and their interests will be influenced by means of the planning and sequent implementation of the project. This can be either positively and negatively. Please always remember to think about that when you identify an interest or influence or importance, that you need to also maybe think about whether this will be positively and negative. It is normally to be expected that all of the project intervention would be positive, but still there might be negative side effects or indirect causes or effects on a particular group. So you need to consider also that the importance, but also influence can always be both positive, but they can also be negative. Here on the right side of the slide, you can see a couple of questions that you can ask yourself or the group of people that's brainstorming with you, doing the stakeholder analysis on, how you assess the importance of stakeholders. So, you ask yourself, which are the problems affecting which stakeholder does the project seek to address or alleviate this? For which stakeholder does the project place a priority on meeting their needs, interest, and expectation, etc., etc. So again, you will have all these materials available at the platform once we finish, so you will be able to use these questions directly while you are doing the stakeholder analysis for your concept note. The second step, as we said, is that you assess the influence of the stakeholder. And influence is basically the power which a stakeholder has over the planning and implementation process. So decision to be made, its implementation that affects the project. So this is extremely important for your project. If you have especially if you going through this analysis, identify that you have a stakeholder or target group which is of high importance and both with high influence on your project intervention, then this person or entity really needs to be considered carefully how you how you will deal with them, how you will include them in the beginning, because they might really determine the how your project will be implemented, or they can influence the success of your project. Eugenia Ganea has a question. She's saying this is very useful, especially the questions on the right. Please upload as soon as possible, as we're already working on the concept note. Okay, I will ask, but I think the colleagues from the project office are aware, so we will make this available as soon as possible. The recording of what we are presenting at the moment and discussion will be also available, so maybe some part you've missed, you lost the connection, or you were not paying attention for some reason, you can again listen through the discussion that we are having at the moment. So this is the chart or the visualization that I've mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So basically here you have basically a vertical and a horizontal line. On the horizontal line, you basically from left to right, you have basically influence. And from left side, you start or you position all of the stakeholders which are of low influence, and those that are of high influence you would put on the right, in the right, let's say right hand side boxes. Then in terms of the importance, this is the vertical line. So the stakeholders that would be of low importance, you would put in the two lower boxes, left or right. And then you would put important stakeholders in the boxes above, which is left and right. And basically by positioning and playing with, what is the importance and influence, you would basically put them in one of these boxes. So basically you can basically just take some flip chart paper or a normal, piece of paper, just write this down. And once you have your stakeholder, just brainstorm, okay, where you would put them, and maybe just write them in or put them with stickers in this, basically, if you would like, squares. deciding on, the low, high influence, the low, high importance. So if somebody is in the box high importance, high influence, which is the right hand side up, this is somebody or something that you really need to consider and see how you're going include them in your project design. And the next slide actually tells you what and how to consider the stakeholders. So, for example, if a stakeholder in the upper blue box is a stakeholder with high importance and high influence, this means that you should have a good working relationship. You must create a good working relationship. You must involve them, especially if these are institutions that can affect the outcome of your project. But for example, if you assess that a stakeholder has low influence and is low importance, this is the situation in box C, we could say that, okay, there is limited influence, so you don't need a lot of involvement, or no involvement is, it would be okay. It's not important. If we can do it, involve them, it will be okay, otherwise not. Then what you should also consider very important is the box D. If you have somebody with very high influence but low importance, this could be a source of risk, so a need for careful monitoring and management. But on the other hand, if you have situation A, which is high importance but low influence, you need special initiatives to protect stakeholders' interests. Okay, so basically this is very easy. You first decide where, I'm going now back to the previous slide, where your stakeholder is, and then from that you look to this slide or this chart, this diagram, and this can guide you in terms of how you should approach the involvement of the particular stakeholder in your project. That is basically the analysis that we have now, the steps that we have now undertaken will basically give you the information you need, the analysis to fill the concept note in section 1, 2, 3. The last thing one should consider in stakeholder analysis, and this is basically the last step, if you would like, in stakeholder analysis, is the level of participation. It is also based on this low, high influence, low, high importance, to also consider, what should their level of participation be, not just at the stage of the concept note, but later on if you get to implement the project. The basic level is, we say, this is maybe a low influence, a low important stakeholder. Maybe we can just involve them by receiving and giving them some information like a newsletter, email, etc. So they are stakeholders, so we want them to be informed, but we really don't need to engage that much with them. Then the second stage, the second level of participation you might consider is that you would consult them. So it's somebody that you would consult. This is maybe important for the stakeholders or target groups, the beneficiaries that will be directly affected by your activities. And then the third, which is very high level of participation, that is collaboration. So this is somebody that has decision-making power in issues or over your project, which means your project partners, co-applicants, affiliates, but also potentially, public authorities, local or national, if you're embarking on a project that has to do on influencing, their performance or their decision-making, etc., etc. So once you go through the analysis and you assess whether they are important and influential, also consider what are the levels of participation you have. And these are really basic 3 levels. So it's very passive. They will be receiving, giving information. We should perform a consultation with them, or there are somebody that needs to be involved in a very collaborative manner, even include them potentially in decision-making, or they maybe already have decision-making power over parts of our project directly, or the outcomes of our project. So let's say sustainability, if you would like. So this is extremely important. So collaboration should be really considered for stakeholders that have a lot of influence. over your project intervention, or again, over your project outcomes and its sustainability. Okay, so the next, just to recap, for stakeholder analysis, basically, this is analysis of your contacts, and it includes, as we said, basically 4 steps. Identify your stakeholders, what are their interests, determine their roles, power, and capacity. Basically, this is done through this scheme of defining their influence and importance. And then we formulate a stakeholder participatory strategy, which is also something you need to describe in section 1 to 3. And that is basically deciding and describing what would the level of their participation be in our future project. So this is basically the main steps one should undertake to analyze their stakeholders, target group, beneficiary. This is the so-called stakeholder analysis step. Is there any question on this part of the presentation? Because then otherwise we move on to step 2, which is problem analysis or problem 3 analysis. So is there any immediate question? I guess not. Okay, so I'm glad that this was clear. So the next step, or that you undertake in logical framework approach, but also the step that is needed or maybe useful, a tool that will be useful in filling in section 122 of the concept now, which asks of you to describe the relevance of the particular needs and constraints of your target country, regions, and relevant sectors, including synergy with other projects and avoidance of duplication. This is basically where you need to describe your pre-project situation, basically analyze what are the problems, what are the previous action that has been undertaken. So basically you need to analyze the problem and how this is relevant to the goal. And here basically the problem analysis tool is very useful. I see now we have a question for Gonzar Alexander. Again, the definition of the target group is more broader than the beneficiaries. Exactly, Alexander. To repeat from what we were saying yesterday, you can imagine that an example, a target group might be a local authority, but then the concrete beneficiary would be the staff of that local authority. A target group can be civil society organization in, let's say, Chisinau or in Transnistria, but then the direct beneficiaries will be the number of organizations or specific organizations that you might list, or the staff of those organizations. So the beneficiaries are the concrete person and entities that will benefit directly from your project, and the target group is the larger, defined beneficiary. So I hope that this is clear now. If not, we can discuss it again at the end of the session. Problem analysis or problem 3 tool, development of problem 3. Basically, the problem analysis helps you identify the negative aspects. So when you're talking about the problem, we people usually identify, okay, what's missing, what's not all right, or maybe we talk about challenges. It depends on our perspective and our approach. But basically, we define the negative aspects of an existing situation. And with the problems analysis, what we do, we basically brainstorm what are the problems that we are trying to solve, or what are the problems that we see in the sector or in geographical area, or this might be a situation of our target group, marginalized group, whoever we are trying to, let's say, help, or our organization is working for the benefits of. So basically what you do, you identify these problems. And then what the problem analysis helps you beyond, identifying and brainstorming, is that you develop what is very important, the causal relationship, the link between these problems, or the cause effect, if you would like. So basically the problem analysis helps you. It's a brainstorming exercise whereby you brainstorm of, first you basically just list the problems, and then what you do, you develop a link between which problem is the cause, and then which problem from those, the problems that you identified is the effect. So basically you develop a causal relationship, and you develop basically branches and kind of a tree. I will show you an example in the next slide. We have a couple of more questions. I see from the previous session. So Yon is asking, what do you mean by level of participation? The level we plan to be involved them in the project, or the level they are usually involved in similar situations? By level of participation, I mean, if you use this tool, is that you assess the level we plan to involve them in the project. So it's basically the first option that you are suggesting. So you should assess how you're going to involve different stakeholders in your project. And this can be different levels, like passive involvement, receiving information, consulting them, including them, or maybe even collaboration, including them in some of the decision making, have a steering group for the project or similar. So problem analysis, again. And basically, this step is easy. It's quite straightforward, but it's very good if you do this with a group of people, a group of colleagues, people in the organizations that are going together to apply and fill in the concept notes, because again, like with stakeholder analysis, it helps you develop a consensual joint view and understanding of the problem you're working, and probably somebody has better understanding or a different understanding. Organizations will work on the same issue from different angle, so they might see different, they might have better experience, professional and understanding on the specific problem, on the on specific subsets of issue that are related to the problem. So it's very important if you do this in brainstorming. So you just basically people just say, okay, what are the problems related to our main cause problem that we are trying to address, and people should just brainstorm, and there should be just someone writing this on a piece of paper, on flip chart cards, whatever you have it. You don't need anything fancy. And then basically once you have that, you put the cards in front of you and you start developing a tree and say, okay, problem number 1 is related to problem number 2. Problem number 1 is the cause, and then problem number 2 is the effect. And then you basically branch out, and what you should get at the end is a tree which describes the existing negative situations. I will show you. I'll just go a bit further. So this is basically what you can expect to see as a tree. It might have very different branches. Branches can be different length. You can have one to 2, you can have 5 levels of connected problem or the causal effect relationship. It really depends, how also in detail you want to go, and how your brain works. And what is very important, if you've never done it, there is no one way of doing this. So maybe a different group of people, experts, would identify similar set of problems, but they might branch and relate them together. So there is no wrong or kind of right way. It really depends on the participation level, and also the knowledge of the people. But if you want to be really sure you don't miss a very important problem, so you don't leave it out and forget it, because then later on this can be your risk for a project. It's very important that you have maybe not experts, but well-informed people on the issue that you're going to work while you are doing this exercise, because it's really important to, when you list the problems, you really, list all the key ones. And then in terms of linking one to the other, there are different, ways. There is no one, I would say, right way. Okay. So you saw what actually the tree, the so-called problem tree, or which is the, let's say, output of the problem analysis would look like. So basically, what are the steps? As I said, you first identify what are the key problems faced by your target group and beneficiaries. And again, this is a brainstorming exercise that you should done with all relevant colleagues. Then you analyze them. You basically spread them out on a table, on a wall if you have a wall, and then you start discussing and seeing which is related to what. Which problem is the cause, or is kind of the roots, if you would like, and which are the effects, which are the branches, the leaves, which should be very much at the top of the tree. And then basically creating this tree either on a table, on a flip chart, on a wall, whatever you have, whatever is easiest to use. You basically visualize that problem analysis. And basically what you have in front is in visualized problem analysis. And this is something that, Section 122 requests you to, to describe. Point 2 in Section 122 directly requests you to provide a detailed analysis of the problems to be addressed by the action and how they are interrelated at all levels. This is exactly what the problem tree is about. So again, this tool is directly relevant and useful for you in preparation of the concept note. This slide again gives you a couple of questions, and let's say issues what you should consider. It's not just okay. The first step is you do the brainstorming, but then you need to probably think and read out the problems the way they're formulated. And maybe reformulate if needed, because this will then affect how you will define your objectives or the objective tree, because this is the next steps you will do. So what is important, what are some of the filters you should consider is that, okay, is this a really existing problem? Is this really? Also, if, you use jargon and abbreviations, explain that. Don't use very broad terminology. Try to be not just realistic, but very concrete as much as possible. Not saying, let's say, infrastructure or social services. Write it in a very concrete, what is in a very concrete, infrastructure in this part of Romania is not good, or social services are not good. This is not enough, this is a very generalized statement. It doesn't help you pin down what the problem is. So if you have such general statements in terms of identifying problem, it will be really hard to then transfer them and transform them into very concrete objective. And if you want to achieve something with your project, you need to be very concrete about it. Also be aware of the interpretation. You might say, okay, government is lazy, but maybe this is not the right, because what the objective would be, the government is not lazy. That's not a really, useful formulation or way to think about the problem. Maybe you would say government is lacking capacity, or local authority is lacking capacity in this and that. And then your objective would be, okay, increasing capacity of local authorities in this and that, or civil society organizations or whatever. Lazy doesn't really, it doesn't really catch the essence of the problem. Also be aware of the absence of solution, don't make statements, don't define problem, there is lack of money, there is lack of population. So if you say there is no money, then the objective would be there is a lot of money. Is this really the achievement on there is a lack of population? Okay, the objective would be there is a population. So you really have to be concrete, realistic, targeted, because how you define your problems will then eventually affect how you define your project objectives. And of course, as I explained, this exercise is very important to be done in a participatory manner. Include stakeholders if you would like, target groups, but definitely include your co-applicants, affiliate entities, and the key people in your project team if you're the lead applicant. And please respect opinions of others. It's very important that you develop, even at this stage of the process, a joint understanding of the realities of the problems and the way you want to intervene into this situation, because otherwise you might have problems if there are different understandings on the way one should intervene in an existing situation or address a challenge via a project. So this is very important, and it's very good if you identify that there are different understandings. So you have time then to discuss this with your future partners and stakeholders and see how you can, come together towards a, let's say, acceptable definition of the problem and then the objective. And again, here you see the problem tree. Let me try to enlarge it so it's clear. For example, this is a problem tree from a project that has to do with disabilities of people and their integration into the labor market. I understand that this is not, let's say, directly something topic that's related to this goal, but nevertheless, I think it is a good and clear example of what a problem tree is and what is the logic. For example, if we take the branch on your left, the basic cause is that training that is provided does not meet disabled people needs, and because of that, interpersonal skills do not meet the needs of the labor market, which leads to disabled people are not prepared to enter labor market, and disabled people do not enter the labor market in sufficient number, which leads to not meeting the employment strategies, but also loss of employment opportunities for disabled people. So you see what is important, that this branches. I don't know if you see the red dot. I hope you see it. So this is me going over the presentation with my mouse. This is basically the causal and the cause relationship that you should establish between, the definition of your problems for your specific area that you're trying to focus on. Okay, let me just downsize. Okay. And then the next step is step 3, which is the analysis of the objectives. And this is basically transformation of the problem tree into so-called objective tree. So at the end of step 2, undertaking a problem analysis helps you develop a problem tree. So the output is the problem tree, whether with step 3, undertaking objectives analysis helps you develop the objective tree. Is there any questions with regard to the problem tree analysis? Okay, so there's no question so far. So if there's something, we will answer it later on. So the purpose of the objective analysis, so that's the first step in the logical framework approach, is to identify the desired situation. So exactly what we would like to see. So now we were discussing what are the problems, what is the current baseline situation, if you like. But then when you undertake the objective analysis, you are discussing and thinking about, okay, but what is the desired situation we want to achieve with our project, with our action, with all problems will solve. And also to get an overview of all potential solutions. So not just the one that we will decide later on to undertake with our project, but basically have an overview of solutions for the current problematic situations. How do you do that? By building an objective tree based on the problem tree. And how you do that? By simply rephrasing each negative situation that is the problem into a positive one that is desirable and realistically achievable. Don't forget that, we want to present ourselves and our intervention in the best possible light to make it very convincing in the concept note. But please, you also consider that it's very important to be realistic about what is achievable and how this is achievable. So it's very important to be realistic in terms of, what objectives you're going to set yourself and how ambitious you're going to be with your project. Step 3, or objective analysis, has to do or is directly related to the part in the concept note or section 121, which requests of you to describe the relevance of the objectives, sectors, teams, specific priorities of your call for proposal, because this section also requests you to describe what is going to be your project objective and basically how this is related to the objective of the call and within which lot you're going to be applying under this call. So how do we do it? So on this slide, you have a very let's say plastic presentation on how you do it. On the left side, you see 2 problems, and these are again the 2 problems, the definition of 2 problems from the example that I just gave earlier with the project on disabled people integration into the labor market. So, for example, if a problem is defined as disabled people do not enter the labor market in sufficient numbers, you transfer it now into a positive statement. So you rephrase. So the problem says they do not enter in sufficient numbers. So here the objective would be that disabled people eagerly enter the labor market. We could also add insufficient numbers and then later on define that. Also, or another example, businesses rarely hire disabled people. So objective would be businesses regularly hire people with disabilities. So you see, basically you take one problem, within your tree and you define it, you transfer it, rephrase it from a negative statement into a positive statement. You should also consider how ambitiously, because sometimes you can say, in terms of, let's say, your problem would be people, local authority, civil society organization in that district do not have capacity to monitor local authorities on public procurement. So an example that I've used continuously throughout the presentation. So, the objective would be enhanced capacities or empowered organizations and local authorities. So you can also think about different levels, let's say different ambitions you will have in terms of the objectives. But basically, what you should know is when you are developing the objective tree, you take your problem tree, definition of each of the problem, and basically you transfer and rephrase them into a positive sentence. And at the end, after doing all of that, you should have an objective tree. Like this, I enlarged it a bit so you can see it. So you can see basically it's the same tree. We just changed the statement from negative to positive. And this is what objective analysis is about, and this is what objective tree looks like. Again, you might have different branches. One branch, as you can see here, can be branched out. This really depends on your analysis, and it's really important that you take enough time. This can be a very long process, and people sometimes give up and say, oh, this is too long, this is not useful. But it's just going to the process. It's not just that you have the project tree, the problem tree or the objective tree on your wall or on your table. The process of going through the discussion with your colleagues is very important, because you're going to get to discuss the key elements that you need to discuss to fill in the concept notes and to develop your project. Basically, when you're discussing the problem, you're analyzing, you're discussing, okay, what are the main problems? But usually when people would fill in the concept note without using these tools that I'm describing now, for example, the problem tree, they would just list, okay, these are the problems, but they don't think about their connection, the links, in terms of how they are links and which is dependent on which. So, this tool is really good in systematizing and taking you through methodologically, so that you really consider all aspects of, analyzing a problem, and then your objective, and also the stakeholders. Eugenia has a question. She's asking whether objectives should be formulated as verbs. Of course, you mean if the sentence should use a verb? Yes, as you can see in the example, this is, the case. It usually uses a verbs. You will see now that basically a part of the objective tree on which you will decide to work, whether it be, just one small branch or one big branch. I hope you can see again the red dot circling. If you decide on which part of the objective tree your project will be focused, then this part of the objective tree is transferred into the log frame. So you have the first column of the log frame, which is called logical of intervention, or now in the new log frame, it's called result chain. So, and you know that in the EU log frame, you usually use verbs when you describe or when you define your objective. Let me just go, smaller that. And then once you do that, the only next step before you basically would embark on developing a full-fledged log frame is to analyze your strategy, or you do so-called scoping. And this is also part that is important for filling in the section 121, because you are here in this section requested to discuss what would be your concrete results and concrete objectives. As you see so far with the objective analysis, you are focusing and discussing all of the alternatives or of the possible objectives a project could focus on. You could decide on focus on, any part of the tree. probably not all because you don't have skills or capacities, or your partnership doesn't have the capacities, probably the resources. The intervention would have to be huge. But usually the next step is important, that you discuss the objective tree once you finalize the objective analysis on which part of the objective tree your project will be focusing. And this is called analysis of the strategy or scoping. We have a question from Leila. She said, shouldn't objectives be something like achieved result and activities as action in present continuous? Leila, there are different schools of, formulating project objectives or specific objectives, but we are talking about EU. They are very much, flexible. I haven't seen some project being rejected in terms of, and they usually do not intervene into the logical framework. They might request you to change or advise you to change some part as part of the negotiation process, but that usually doesn't happen. So, yes, in principle, objectives should be achieved results. I mentioned that they should be clear, but they should also be realistic. But then in terms of, formulation in terms of English language, as Eugenia asked, there should definitely be a verb, but then, you can formulate them in present continuous as well. Yon is asking, how do we do with the causes that are not under our control? From your example, not support with childcare, high labor costs, etc. This is exactly what, Yon, we are discussing at the moment. Usually, what you do with analysis of the strategy, so you have the objective tree, you have all of the problems, but you realize that you neither have the capacities, resources, time, and probably you cannot influence all of them. Some might be out of, as you say, out of your control. So what you do the last step, and that is that you analyze your strategy, your scope, on which part of the objective tree we will be focusing. So what you do, you identify possible alternative strategies that can contribute to the achievement of the higher level objectives. You agree on priority strategy based on assessment of your relevance, the feasibility, and the sustainability on each of them. And how do you do that? You identify cluster group of objectives and choose the frame of project intervention. If I go back to objective tree from the previous slide, basically, you will discuss and decide which part of the objective tree you will be focusing on as your part of your intervention. And what you do, you basically, let me say, quote unquote, throw away all of the rest, or you put it on the side and you do not consider them again, but you just take the branch and basically this becomes your project objective. The highest level objective that you decide becomes your project objective, and this is then entered into the log frame, or in the step of the concept note. You would describe this in section 1.2.1, where you have to define what your project intervention would be about, what your project objective would be about. So, for example, if we are still, I'm sure that I'm clear and you understand this. When you do the scoping, for example, I would together with my colleagues sit in front of this objective tree, and what I would say, okay, I'm not an organization, a partnership that can affect the businesses, for example, and their attitudes towards disabled people. So I cannot focus on, let's say, intervening into the right side of this objective tree. But I'm an organization that works on capacity building of disabled people, works with them, developing their skills, different skills that they can have so that they can find a job. So I'm an organization that focuses on that. So what I can do, I can focus on the left-hand side of this objective tree, and I can work on training, doing specific trainings. I can help them, them be felt confident, and they can then enter into the labor market. And what I then do, I take the left side to the level, that I decide is appropriate for my intervention. And I take this, the highest level. For example, in this case, it could be disabled people readily entering the labor market, or disabled people eagerly entering the labor market. I can also decide that my project objective would be employment strategies are being met, but this is a really high level, and maybe this is something that I cannot achieve, but I can try influence. So this could be an overall objective of my intervention. So let's say the top level of the log frame. And my, let's say, project objective would be that the disabled people are eagerly entering into the labor market. Then all of the left side of this objective tree would be issues that I would consider as, specific objectives, then going downwards as outcomes, and the lowest level could be my level of activities in my log frame or in my project, thinking about my project intervention. Is this clear? So basically, with the scoping, you decide, okay, where are we with our consortium, with our partners? Where are our skills? Where can we appropriately intervene so we can do this? We are confident, and then you, focus on that part of the tree only. So, as I said, again, let me just, okay. When you do this decision making on which part of the objective tree are going to focus, actually what your objective of the project is going to be, you can use the following criteria to decide on this. And this is actually what, the elements of the concept notes also request you to fill in. And the first is, what is the expected contribution to key policy objectives? I mentioned already one criteria, which is that, what are my skills and the skills of my partner, and where is our niche and where is our added value, where are we working on? So this is something that you consider. Then you also need to consider, what are you going to expect it to contribute to policy objectives. In the case of the call that we are discussing today, this might not be the policy objectives at a high level, but would be probably the objectives of the call for proposals, which you have stated in the background section of the guidelines for applicants. Then the second thing you need to consider, okay, what are the benefits of the target groups? Which part of the objectives, which objective would be best to focus on, would have the greatest benefits to the target, greatest added value, and also to consider the complementarity with other ongoing and planned programs and projects. There might be an intervention already in place that is dealing with very similar or complementary activities. So this is very important to consider, so you avoid duplication, and this is also a requirement of what you need to fill in the the concept notes. In the section 122.5, you need to actually state your knowledge of whether there are any other intervention, and if there are, how your intervention is going to be complementary. Eugenia is asking, in what section of the concept notes do we do the analysis of the strategy? So the analysis of the strategy information will be entered in section 121, because you will be describing there the objectives of your project, and you will be discussing there the relevance of your project objective to the objective of the call, but also analysis of the strategy. For example, the complementarity with other projects needs to be described in section 1225, because it asks you to describe and state the complementarity with other projects. So basically, it's useful for both filling in 121 and also 122. Other criteria for scoping, you need to be realistic about what you can achieve are, what is the urgency of the problem or the issue, capacity of your organization, I already mentioned, and partners to implement. What is your available expertise? One objective might be very valid, but you might not possess the expertise or the capacity to do that. So then this is definitely something you're not going to focus on. Then what is the legibility of the area of the action, the types of activities? You need to really consider also here the limitations of the call, so the guidelines, and what does the guideline say. So for example, this call is about capacity building. It is not about infrastructure or supplies procurement, etc. So you cannot, for example, buy things for local authorities or your groups or civil society organizations. But within this goal, you can focus on objectives and intervention that has to do with building their capacity. It can be in a very wide sense, also raising awareness, but also in a very concrete sense, trainings, small grants so they perform concrete activities, etc., etc. Also, scoping criteria should be, what are the program's objectives and how you're going to measure, and also amount of money available, because maybe the grants limitations that you have under this goal might be big, but consider what kind of intervention you need to do. This still might be an available amount of money for what you think is actually needed. So maybe you need to be less ambitious or work on a lower level of your objective 3. And this slide basically just shows you what the first column of the logical framework looks like. But actually, why I put it here, because you do not need to develop the full-fledged log frame to submit a concept note, is that the first 2 boxes in which the text reads overall objectives, impact, and specific objectives, outcomes, which are bolded, are basically the 2 pieces of information you need to provide in the concept note. This is in section 121, and it's actually the information that you get when you do the analysis of the strategy or you do the scoping, because this is basically the part of the objective 3 that you would be focusing on, and the part that you decide through the analysis of the strategy and scoping. Then this becomes your lower level of the logic intervention, which you then will need to develop further on in developing the full-fledged proposal. And this is where I end in describing the main basic tools for preparing the concept note or the first steps in the logical framework approach. So now we have some time for questions. I went a bit over time that was allocated for presentation. But please come ahead with questions that you might have. There are no questions. Everything is clear? Okay, we have a question. Sabina, hi. We know that we already discussed this yesterday, but would like to double check. 60,000 euro for third party is per party. Hi, Sabina. As I mentioned in the beginning of yesterday's webinar, I am not official of the European Commission, so unfortunately I'm not the one that can interpret the rules, and that is the guidelines. But the good thing is that since the concept note deadline has been extended, so has the possibility for you to still ask questions been extended till the end of this Friday. The sentence that you're probably referring on page 12 states that the maximum amount of the financial support per third party is 60,000 euros. When you read this sentence, it sounds like this means that an individual grant under regranting can be 60,000 euros. So I understand that it might be confusing. Usually in calls for proposals, when the amount of the financial support for third parties or re-granting or sub-granting, if you'd like, is defined, usually just the overall amount is defined. So it's not per specific grant, but overall amount of how much you can have in your sub or re-granting scheme. However, the way this sentence sounds in these guidelines, it sounds like this is only for one grant. So basically, if you want to give 2 grants, it would be 120,000 euros. So I would say that this is confusing potentially, and I would suggest you write this question to the delegation. I have also made note of your questions on financial support to third parties, and also whether it is a must or requirement or not to have co-applicants or not, because looking to the way this instruction is written in the guidelines, whereas also clarification issued in the corrigenda, might be confusing. So I will be transcending these dilemmas to the European Commission or the delegation in Moldova, and I hope they will publish this once they publish the corrigendum. But again, I would expect that this question is quite urgent for you, because this might, affect how you're going to, let's say, construct your project. So I would urge you to write to the EUD address that's specified in the guidelines today or before Friday, and they should answer you directly, and also publish the corrigendum on or after 7th of May. And I think, then you will have it, what we call it, in black and white without any dilemma. Jon is asking, in the application, should we describe the entire problem tree or just present the project intervention part? Jon, if you were with us on in block 2 session yesterday, when we went through the concept note template, you probably know that the template for the concept note is very limited. You can literally write maximum 5 pages, and you really need to stick to this, because if you don't stick to the 5 pages, limitation altogether, or 1 page for description of the action and 3 pages for relevance, you will be disqualified. So your proposal will not be considered. So considering that, my suggestion to you is to not write about the whole problem tree. You maybe cannot list all the problems, but discuss maybe the main, so you show in the concept note that you understand the all aspects of the problem, and then of course you will focus on writing more about and focusing on your project intervention. So what I would say, you probably cannot write because you don't have space for the entire problem tree, but you need to show mentioning a couple of them, not just the ones that you will be focusing with your project. So you show to the evaluation commission that you actually understand the whole breadth of the problems. Consider that, this description can be maybe 1 to 2 paragraphs long, not more. Lina is saying, sorry if I missed it in any of previous sessions, but can we consider an associate organization which would have the same role for other application? Can an organization be an associate in different projects? Again, this is a question with regards to the rule. But as far as I've seen, the guidelines on page when it talks about the rules for eligibility, let me just check. On page 13, it discusses the issue of number of application and grants per applicant/affiliated entities, and it doesn't describe limitation for associates. So looking at that part, this part of the guidelines does not limit the participation of associate organizations in an application. This refers only to lead applicants, co-applicants, and affiliated. So reading the guidelines, the answer would be no. And associate organizations can have role in 2 different projects. So this is at least what the guideline states. Okay, we have a question translated from Romania. Can central authorities be beneficiaries or implementation partner? So this is again, I see there's still a lot of dilemma about the rules. So again, I'm not the last authority. If you have really, a dilemma that you're not sure, but your project depends on, you need to ask this delegation. So if one, about the question on central authorities being beneficiaries or implementation partners. So these are very two different roles. Beneficiary is somebody that will benefit. For example, they will go on a training, they will benefit from the, whatever project will be focusing, whereas implementation partner is somebody that, is undertaking activity, has a budget, has activities. So probably you cannot be, first thing is, should be clarified that you cannot be in both roles, both be beneficiary and implementation partner. Then the second, central authorities. As far as one reading the eligibility criteria for lead applicants and affiliate, I do not see here stated that central authorities could be the beneficiary. It is stated that local authorities constituted in accordance with legislation enforced in the country or an association of local authorities in the country or at regional level can act as a lead applicant, co-applicant. So as far as I can see from this call, I would say that the central authorities could probably be beneficiaries or associates or potentially affiliates, but probably not implementing partners or lead applicants and co-applicants. Please bear in mind, because I know we have local authorities also being part of this call for proposals and will be applying. Please focus on make note. We haven't discussed the costs eligibility a lot, because in the concept note you don't get into description of the types of costs you would be undertaking in your project, but please take note on page 16 under the eligible cost. Please consider that for local authorities, salary cost of the personnel on national administration is considered an eligible cost. So please have this in mind if you're a local authority. Next question. Eligibility cost. You said that we cannot use the money for infrastructure or procurement for public authorities, but can we use in this purpose money within our sub-granting scheme? Okay, I don't remember maybe saying that, maybe that's translation issue, but can we use in this purpose money with or sub-granting? Sabina, are you asking me whether eligible costs when you would be developing a full-fledged proposal would be of buying things? If you're thinking of buying or undertaking infrastructural project, obviously this is not the call for proposals to do that. But if you're thinking of about small procurement either for the project partner or for beneficiaries, which might be in this case local authority, then this is accepted if it's essential to undertake the action. I'm not totally sure if I understood your question correctly, but this would be my answer. So if it's not, please can you just write your question again? Svetlana is asking, can an NGO be the lead partner for Lot 2 dedicated to LPA? And this is a question from Viorel Miron. Again, I would suggest that Viorel ask this the delegation directly, because the way the call is composed, one could made understood that only Lot 1 is for civil society organization and Lot is for local authorities. So this is how at least the call is written, but there is no strict definition anywhere which states Lot 1, if for Lot 1 only civil society organizations can apply and for Lot 2 only local authorities. So generally the answer could be yes, but this is something that you should check with the EUD. Okay, I'm sorry for that, but we couldn't have anybody from the EUD with us, so they could basically ask this question. I think it's good if you ask this question directly in written, so you also have a written and you will have a conclusive answer, and it will be from the authority which is responsible for decision making. Do ask them, because this question, it might depend on how you will approach writing and submitting your project. So do send them a question. Mariana is asking, is it possible for the same project implemented on different areas to be funded by two partners that provide grants but are supported by the EU? For example, the project will be implemented in Transnistria region, being funded through EU funds cross-border, and the same project will be multiplied on the right bank of the river, being financially supported by the European Commission. If I understood you correctly, you are saying that you would like to apply under this call for a project that is basically has the same methodology, similar or same activities, but would be implemented in other district or part of Republic of Moldova. I mean, this is definitely possible. So basically, your added value would be that you would be replicating a methodology, a set of activities that worked in Transnistria under another, budget line of EU in another territorial geographical part of Moldova. That's definitely feasible and appropriate and relevant if it's in line with objectives of the call and the lots. But my advice to you would be to be very careful and approach very clearly, describe how this is an added value. So you will need to demonstrate, it will be important you demonstrate how this is not just a copy-paste of another project in Transnistria that you might be undertaking, but it's actually a replication, it's synergy, it's complementarity. And this will be very, very important for the Commission. And most importantly, that you will demonstrate the relevance of this project to this call for proposals. Because this is the two key things the Commission Evaluation Committee will be looking for. So definitely this is possible. So you can replicate your project from your Transnistria for this call, but make sure that you are able to show how this is relevant to this call, and show that this is not just a copy-paste, it's a replication, it's not duplication, and it will show synergy vis-a-vis the project you have in Transnistria. Later on, when you might develop the full proposal and be implementing such a project, you need to be careful that you don't use the money, if your project in Transnistria is still ongoing, for co-financing this project. Remember, in Block 1 session, we discussed the guideline. It is utterly important. You can get fined, you can get disqualified if you are using a co-financing from another EU project for a EU project. Okay, I hope this was useful and answered your question. Do we have other questions? Sabina is asking about the subgranting. If we have subgranting and an organization needs some procurement, construction of infrastructure equipment in order to be sustainable through catering and to have business component. This is a very specific question. This is not a question that you can get an answer from if you would ask the EUD at this stage, because the concept note doesn't deal with such issue yet. It's too, let's say, early, because you will only get to define the parameters of your financial support to third parties or subgranting later on in the full application. Yes, I have seen projects that where you would have a subgranting scheme and it would be allowed to have very small construction on infrastructure. I see that in this school there is also a possibility for activities that have to do with development and piloting. So what I would say that, in terms of the EU rules, one could say that this could be allowed, but it will really depend on how you would be able to justify this, because this is a call for civil society capacity building and local authorities, that you really need some support for construction or, development of some small infrastructure in, let's say, a local community, or buying some kind of equipment. So I would say generally the rule would allow it. you don't discuss this or you don't go into this in the concept note, this is something to discuss or write about, elaborate in the full application. The EU rules allow it, but you will really need to justify it well. I hope this answers your question for the moment. Okay, do we have other questions? Before people start leaving, I think somebody were already leaving. On the last slide, you will see that the date is wrong because we prepared the slides. I prepared the slides the middle last week because they were translated to Romanian, so we were not able to change. So as I mentioned, from now on, we will have an online help desk support available to help you in elaborating. So not interpreting the rules. If you have question on interpreting the rules, a lot of the questions we had now were about interpreting rules, not about formulating concept note. So questions about interpreting rules should be sent to the EUD Moldova by latest on Friday. But if you need support in terms of formulating part, you have a dilemma, of how you should formulate. So some part of the concept note or some kind of approach, or maybe you have a specific situation, you're not sure how to treat a stakeholder, how to involve them, those types of questions, we will have an online help desk support available for you, which is me. You can write me on my email. You have the email on the slide. So this is my personal email, my name and last name together, Tanya Hafner-Ademi @gmail.com. From today till 18th of May, so the help desk will be available by the last day before the deadline. And please send me in questions. I will be trying to answer all of your questions in the course of the day when you will be asking the question. And we will be also publishing within the Eastern Partnership Civil Society Facility platform website and questions and answers. So the idea here is not for you to prepare concept notes and draft concept notes and to send it to them. This is not what I'm supposed to do or allowed to do, but to ask questions and concrete dilemmas you have in terms of formulation or deciding, analyzing, maybe you will develop your objective tree, but you will have some dilemma in terms of your scoping. So these types of question you can send to me, or you have a stakeholder and you're afraid how to involve them, or you're not sure. So this is again a dilemma you can send to me. So we will be publishing all of the questions and answers on the platform, but I'll be also individually responding to those of you asking this question. So, and I will try to do that depending on, how many questions we receive, but we will try to be online and do it very quickly within the same day. So this is something you should be aware. So you have on one side the possibility to ask the EUD Moldova questions for clarifications with regards to the rules, but you will also have a online help desk support facility composed of me, but if needed also the Eastern Civil Society Facility project team, if needed in some extent, to support you with any question you have in formulating concept note. Lina is asking where we can find the recording of the first two sessions. I think they have not been uploaded, but this will happen shortly. The project team from the project will do that, and I'm hoping this will probably happen very soon. I don't know if somebody from the project is here, moderator, maybe they can tell us approximately when this would happen so you're aware of this. If not, I think they also have all of your emails because you registered, and you will get this in the email. You can see that Elena Palivoda from the project is saying that the links to the webinar recording will be sent today to all registered participants and will be available. So basically you will have it today. You will have the link to all of the 3 blocks. So from yesterday, but also today, on your email in the course of today. And I remain available through my email for any individual question, that you might have in terms of formulating your concept notes. So is there any last content question that you